Hello, Salt Strong Nation. Joe Simons, like Diamonds, back again. Got my main man, Wyatt Parcell. What's up, brother?
What's going on, everybody?
You're now a Texan.
That is correct. I am here in Corpus Christi, officially a Texan.
So if you missed the big news, Wyatt, who was our fishing coach in Wilmington, North Carolina, and kind of covered the Carolinas, is now moving or has moved to Texas. And really cool story. So Wyatt was one of our insider members and actually was living in Tennessee, of all places, not exactly the saltwater capital of the world, but like many of our members, when your time is very valuable, which even if you live on the coast, your time is still valuable. Every time he wanted to go fishing, he wanted to maximize his time. So, like any smart person who reads books or takes courses or hires a coach to become better at something, Wyatt was like in like the not just like an insider member, like he was in this like drinking out of a fire hose, taking it all in. And he finally, moves to North Carolina, an area you have not fished before, right? At the time, like that was brand new, completely new to you.
Yeah, I had never put a line in saltwater in North Carolina before I had moved there.
Got it. So there for a year and a half ish. And one reason was just to prove everything that we're talking about works. Because we know we hear from so many anglers saying, well, my area is different. And it is. Of course, it's different than Florida, right? Texas is different. Florida. I lived in Texas for 4 years. I fished in that Galveston area. I know it's different. But at the same point, it's very, very similar. I mean, you're still talking about the same species that have the exact same biology. They have the same wants and needs. They're all still looking for bait and they're looking for structure so they don't get killed. I mean, when you look at it from a big picture, it's a whole lot easier to put the pieces of the puzzle together when you go away from, oh, my area is different, that stuff's not going to work here, to saying, you know what are all the similarities, which is what we're going to cover here today. And I also, lived in Georgia for many, many years, and my in-laws still live there in Savannah. It's a different area, right? Why? I mean, I mean, when you talk about tides, Savannah, Georgia is a whole lot different than Tampa, Florida. I mean, that's different, but still, we're fishing the same points in creek mouths, and we were still looking for the same types of structure in same types of places that these redfish and speckled trout and flounder were going to be ambushing bait coming at them. For the least amount of effort they could put together. So this whole podcast is kind of on Wyatt's journey, so going from Tennessee, like drinking out of a fire hose, taking all this information, all these lessons, and all the on the water stuff that we teach as the Insider Club, moving to North Carolina, proving it works. And now I've done tons of insider reports. And now, next challenge. I mean, you're in Texas. First day, we're going to talk about your very first fishing trip. And this is the first time you've ever fished in Texas your whole life, or have you fished in Texas before?
100%. I've never fished in Texas before, never put a line out, not even for bass fishing. This was my first complete day of fishing in Texas.
Dang. All right. So I'm guessing one thing that we'll just talk about some similarities in terms of how to approach a new spot, or maybe you just haven't fished in a while, or maybe you're struggling and you want to become more consistent. Wyatt looked for the 3 B's. If you know the 3 B's, we hammered over and over go in the Insider Club: birds, bait, and boils. So Wyatt, out of those three, how many did you pursue and or find on this first day in Texas?
So where I caught all of my fish, all three B's were present. Now there were areas that I was looking at that there were some present, but when I found all three of them, I was catching fish.
Dang. So what did you catch in your first day? How much time did you have to fish? What'd you catch?
Yeah, so I went out for about 3 hours, really just kind of to explore because these are waters I've literally never stepped foot in. I did a little bit of wading, just kind of trying to learn how to do that. I've never wade fished before. I've just always fished out of a kayak. I have done a little bit of on foot fishing, so it was almost a learning experience as much as it was an exploration trip. But managed to catch some redfish and some trout. And I saw a ton of other species out there as well. I saw some sheep's head. I believe I might have seen a flounder. Couldn't be 100% sure, but I mean, it's just teeming with life over here.
You're gonna have a good time, and our insider members who get to see your insider on the water reports are really gonna be pumped. And by the way, I know you North Carolina guys, you might be freaking out saying, "Hey, Wyatt's gone." We're working on a replacement for him. We have a couple people we're already talking to, some really amazing guides in that area. So just want to throw that out there real quick. If you're listening to North Carolina thinking that, oh, we lost our fishing coach for that area, we got your back. But back to Texas now. So it's your first day. You found the three Bs. Talk about the pre-trip planning, right? I'm guessing you didn't just put your waders on and walk out there. Did you bring your kayak, by the way?
Yeah, I did bring my kayak. I
Okay.
actually had it attached to me with a stringer. I don't ever keep fish, so I use my stringer as my tether to my kayak. But yeah, pre-planning is so important. It's something we talk about a lot in the Insider Club, just because it can absolutely make or break a trip. So understanding the conditions of the day that you're fishing, as well as the conditions leading up to that day. So I was looking at the weather from 2 weeks ago. I wasn't even here 2 weeks ago, but I needed to know what these fish have been experiencing, what their patterns have been, because that's going to ultimately affect where those fish are. And then the current conditions of that day are going to affect where they're feeding. So I basically needed to know where there would be fish, and then I needed to know where they would be hunting. So basically, what I was looking for, being that we are in the wintertime, I'm trying to get away from the passes, the inlets. So I'm in Aransas Pass. I was actually really far away from the pass. I was fishing in an area called Redfish Bay, which is a really popular zone around here. I'm not going to say exactly where. That information is for insiders only. But basically, was looking for some zones that were close to deeper water. Basically, deeper water is going to allow fish to kind of sit in a stable environment. If they're holding shallow when that temperature fluctuates, it's going to mess with their metabolism. And if they're, hanging in the shallows one day when it's really hot and they're really apt to feed, if that temperature switches and it gets cold and they don't have energy, their body is still kind of churning up all that energy, and it's they're basically eating themselves, and they don't have the energy to chase down bait because it's now cold, and it makes them extremely unhealthy. So those fish are going to seek deep water. And we actually did talk about this in our last podcast, Joe, about where we would find trout in Texas. That was before I moved here. And believe it or not, that's exactly where I found the fish, was close to deep water, hanging on the edges of flats, which, funny enough, is exactly where I was catching trout in North Carolina. On paper, it's exactly the same type of spot. Now, it may look different on satellite maps, but knowing how to differentiate between those nuances is something that, I'm looking forward to helping insiders connect the dots with. But basically, right on the edges of the flats was where I was finding a lot of these predator fish.
Cool. So let's stay on this whole pre-trip planning. Do you use Google Maps, Google Earth? What are you using?
Yeah, so I like Google Earth a lot. And it's really something I found in North Carolina, playing around with historical imagery, because we do have those really big tide swings, and being able to see different images is always really helpful. But even doing it here in Texas, where the tides don't differentiate too much, but understanding how seagrass patterns can change throughout the year, depending on the season, understanding what currents. We do have some negative tides right now here in Texas, which is gonna, that's provided by different currents. So it's gonna change the topography of the flat. So I looked through a lot of different historical images on Google Earth. Now, those of you who are using Google Earth on your phone, you're not gonna have access to that feature. I use the Google Earth on desktop. It's just something you have to download. It's completely free, but it's one of the most useful tools, probably something that I use every single trip to go out and plan. Google Earth is one of my favorites. I did look at the area on Google Maps and Bing, just because I like looking at different images. One image might capture something that wasn't seen, or it was taken on a different day where there was some type of clarity, or maybe seagrass had, been present in one, not the other. So I just like having a ton of different images that I can cross-reference and kind of play between, so I can have the most, diverse game plan possible.
What catches your eye? We're always trying to maximize structure. If you guys have read Luke's book that's coming out on Amazon this year, Redfish Secrets, he emphasizes structure over and over and over again, because structure is attracting bait, which attracts the predators, and the predators love structure. That's the same with bass fishing or anything, right? End of the day, if you can maximize your structure, you're going to maximize the amount of strikes you have. What are you looking for on Google Earth or Google Maps, whatever you happen to be using? What types of structure? You just looking for regular patterns? You looking for oyster bars, docks? What are you looking for, especially this time of year?
Yeah, so this time of year, what I'm really looking for is the depth changes. That's something that really, first off, I'm going to kind of prioritize, because as we talked about earlier, those fish are going to want to have a deep, stable environment, preferably one that's close to some flats where you know you're going to have some bait fish. So I really like those depth changes, be them a channel that runs through a flat, or if it's an ICW that borders a flat. And you can always see those on Google Maps, especially if you're looking at an image that was taken in the wintertime. This is, again, why I love Google Earth, because you can actually see the month that the image was taken. And if you look during the winter months, that's usually when you get your clearest imagery. In December, January, those are my favorite images. And generally, you'll be able to see these depths, these areas of depth, because they're dark blue or they're very dark green, depending on the water clarity in your area. I know when I was in North Carolina, it was almost black when you were looking at a depth change in a coastal creek. Looking for those darker spots, that's basically because the light's not able to reach the bottom, because obviously the water is not crystal clear. So there's going to be a little bit of light that's going to be lost. And that's how you're able to see those pockets of depth in the flats or bordering flats. And that's usually the first thing I'm going to look for on maps. And then I'm going to find some sort of structure that's adjacent to that depth change. Now, in this case that we're talking about, it was the edges of those flats, and I was really wanting to prioritize the edges that were close to the camo patterns of seagrass that we talk about a lot. And I know everyone listening to this wondering what might that look like. We have images of that stuff at saltstrong.com, how to read Google Maps, how to read satellite maps. Basically, this camo pattern is a mix of sand and seagrass, and it literally looks like an army fatigue. It's something that looks like camouflage, and it really actually helps those fish camouflage when they want to get a meal. They sit in these potholes where it's a mix of grass and sand, and it breaks up their outline, especially sea trout. I mean, if you think about a sea trout, their back is covered in those dots, and it's just meant to camouflage with the sand and the grass, and they can just come up from below and grab an easy meal. So basically, the first two things I was looking for on this trip, that I went to every single spot knowing that this was an area that I had pre-planned for, was it was adjacent to a depth change and it had the camo seagrass bottom.
Got it. Cool. And real quick, you mentioned we have some videos. We have an entire course, like a legit masterclass on using these different satellite maps. And we go over everything from Google Earth to Google Maps to even being in MapQuest. There's little nuances with all of them. And I mean, this course, we were selling it for $300 at one point, and people were paying for it. Now we give it free to all members because it's something that like everyone needs. Even full-time guides have gone through that and say, holy smokes, I just learned something about these maps I didn't know. So that alone is worth the cost of admission to become a member. It's something we give for free. It's really the foundation of going out there and being able to go catch multiple fish in a brand new spot you've never fished before in your life, in a brand new state you've never even fished before. So I think that is so awesome. Now, you said you were waiting, but you had your kayak. Talk about that, because I see that question come up a lot in Facebook. People are looking. I know is it paddler.com? Paddler.com?
Yeah, paddling.com.
Or
Yeah, that's a
paddling.com. Yeah, paddling.com.
yeah.
So did you go there? Talk about how you're finding launch sites and places to actually put your kayak in, because that's a little bit of a handicap and sometimes a pro, depending on where you are, because you can kind of launch anywhere, but at the same point you can't, and you can't go as far. So talk about that aspect, and then I want to talk about the tides and the wind, and probably smart fishing tides, how you use that to find a good area as well.
Yeah, so paddling.com is a fantastic resource for finding kayak launches. It pulls a lot of different information, and users can actually input their own launches to share with others as well. And it's used by a lot of people other than just fishermen. So there's a lot of folks that have shared a lot of great launches that a lot of fishermen probably didn't even know about. Great thing here in Texas is you can pull off a lot of causeways and roads, and especially this time of the year when the water is pretty much negative for most of the day, you can actually pull your car or your truck or whatever off the road and be at a pretty good launch site to have access to these types of flats. So basically, the only reason I brought my kayak along is because I knew I was going to be crossing the intercoastal. If I just wanted to go wade some of the other flats that border some of the redfish bay areas off the causeway, I wouldn't have even needed it. From the images I've seen, you can step off a lot of these causeways here in Texas and absolutely start fishing. But I just wanted to try this one specific area out because a lot of insiders have asked questions about it, and so I just wanted to start there. You were asking about
The tide and the wind. You kind of touched on it earlier on the pre-trip plan that you were looking at the weather patterns and everything that was going on even a week in advance. So talk about the importance of that, because I think for most people it's an afterthought. I think most inshore anglers, the weekend warriors, they understand the importance of maps, even though they might look at it, last minute. Hey, here's a couple spots, but talk about the importance of studying, not just the tides, but even the wind direction to really, really like hone in on just, giving yourself every advantage possible over the
Absolutely.
fish.
And I mean, that was a huge, huge key to success for this trip. There was some really heavy winds coming in from the south, and it was actually directing where the bait was being blasted off of this flat. And that's actually where I ended up catching the fish, where this entire flat, as that wind was rolling across it, was blowing that bait that was near the surface, the small bait fish and other creatures, basically was blowing them off this flat. And those predators were staged on the edges of those flats, waiting for that bait to kind of get blown by the wind. So taking into consideration where the wind is rolling, understanding how that's going to affect the kind of movement of bait as well is really, really important. And I always use smart fishing tides for this. It's just got all of my tides, my wind direction, my weather patterns. All of it is just in one simple little place, so I can kind of cross-reference things. And again, as we talked about with depth changes, I can kind of look at the sonar maps and see exactly where those depth pockets are, how deep they are. I'll know if I can actually wade those areas. So it's a really, really helpful tool. But understanding wind direction, especially with wading too, is really important, because it's going to affect how, you wade the flat. If you're kind of standing in an area and it's a shallow flat, the current's not going to have as much of an effect on the water on that flat as much as the wind will. It's going to dictate a lot of where the fish are going to hold, what direction they're going to be facing. And you need to approach areas differently depending on the direction of the wind. And it's almost like kind of fishing with the current. For those insiders that are in the Carolinas that have followed my reports, that was really how I positioned for a lot of my trips, was understanding where the current was going to be flowing, because most fish will position themselves nose into the current, waiting for a meal to come to them. On shallow flats like this, and especially in areas like Texas where the tide changes are very minimal and they don't really have too much of an effect on current, a lot of these shallow flats that are 1, 2, 3 feet in depth are really heavily wind driven. So approaching these areas, understanding where the wind is going to be blowing bait, how that's going to change where fish position themselves is important, because if you're standing in front of a fish and the current is blowing, or I'm sorry, the wind is blowing current off your waders, or it's blowing, basically creating something that's going to allow those fish to know that you're there. If you're standing upstream of them, you're not going to catch those fish. They're going to spook off, especially these big trout that they have here in Texas. You need to approach from behind, or you need to approach, horizontal to them. Finding the right spot to be casting from is just as essential as having the right bait and picking the right spot, because if you scare those fish off, you're not going to catch them. So understanding where the wind's blowing on shallow flats like this is really, really important. I would say probably one of the most important pieces outside of spot selection.
Cool. Yeah, and that's something we focus on big time in the Insider Club. And if you guys aren't aware, for you non-insiders, what are you waiting on? Come join us today. But one of the big things that we just simplified was the weekend game plan. And we did a survey recently to our insider members, and thank all of you who filled it out. That was one of the top things that insiders said they like most about their membership. The discounts on tackle came up a bit, all the spots and all the trends and stuff that we're doing in the on the water reports, like guys like Wyatt and the rest of our fishing coaches are doing, all were up there. But that one at the top was that weekend game plan, just because it's so simple. And so what Luke does is he gets in our community. We have, new fishing reports going up like literally every 4 minutes now. And he gets through there and spends, I mean, hours going through every one of these things and basically just curating all the trends. And in 10 minutes or less, usually every Thursday night or Friday morning, he's got one video and he gets on a satellite map like White's talking about and talks about the wind, and literally starts in Texas and moves to Florida and up to the Carolinas. It says, guys, here's the exact type of spots you need to be fishing. I'm talking about depth. I'm talking about based on the wind, everything you need to know in 10 minutes or less. It'd be like having a fishing guide in your back pocket, just tell you, hey, here's what I'm seeing right now. You want to go to these kind of spots, this type of depth. You want to look at these kind of points, these kind of creek mouths or docks or whatever it is, and in 10 minutes or less, all focused on inshore saltwater fish. So redfish and speckled trout, snook here, if you have them in your certain states, and flounder. It's game changing. It shortens the curve because we're all busy and we all want those shortcuts, and that's exactly what it is. And now that we have you there too, you're going to be able to give a whole lot more intel in Texas, just like you've been doing for North Carolina. So I'm really pumped to see that. I'm also a little bit curious on what types of lures you use. Did you change up anything? Did you do anything different? Because I hear some people say, "Oh, those slam shadies or whatever the leprechauns, they only work in Florida. They only work in Georgia." What did you do differently? Do you have to buy all new tackle, all new rods and reels?
No, not at all. I went out with one rod, one reel, and I used my number one lure, which is the Slam Shady. And before anybody, comes up with anything to say to that, that lure really just does work. If I was going to a new state like I was, wanting to catch fish like I was, I would use the best lure for that situation. I don't know where these fish are. I want to feel out these new areas as quickly as possible. I want to use a paddle tail. I also want to use a color that I know is going to work at multiple different depths in varying water quality. Water clarity. And I didn't know exactly what this area was going to look like. That's a lure that I've used in North Carolina in the dirtiest of dirty water, and I've caught tons of fish with it. It's absolute confidence bait for me. I took it out here, had the exact same level of confidence with it, and it was able to catch the redfish, was able to catch the trout. It's just something that I know I can depend on, especially when I'm wanting to feel out new areas, because the versatility of a paddle tail is just amazing. The way that I was fishing it changed throughout the day. Earlier on in the beginning of the report, basically I was going out and I was fishing a little bit slower. I had a really light jig head on, and I was fishing over these potholes, basically pausing and just allowing it to really sink and just take all the time that it needed to sit over that pothole, because as we know, those predators are going to sit in those areas. So have my polarized sunglasses on, I'm casting at these holes as I'm wading this flat, knowing that there's a possibility there's a predator in any one of these. So I wanted to give them the opportunity to get a grab on that bait. And as it got later on into the day, I did speed it up a little bit, a couple more bounces that were getting mixed in, basically just picking up the slack, twitch, pause. But the key trend was just letting that Slam Shady kind of work itself over the grass and then pausing on those potholes. That was really the best possible approach for me. Now, I know we do have the new power prawn out, and that's an awesome lure when you know where the fish are, but I did not for this trip. And now that I do, I might go ahead and use it in some of those deeper holes and things of that nature. But I do like the paddle tails when I'm searching out new zones, just because the action derived from that lure is usually one more consistent with a constant retrieve, or one that's fished a little bit quicker. The natural presentation of a shrimp is a little bit slower, twitch, and then you got to wait for a little while. So I was really just wanting to feel out this new zone with the Slam Shady, just because it's a confidence lure for me. I know I can cover a new zone, new area with it. I mean, when I was in North Carolina, I'd be going to a new spot almost every single time. I'd be driving an hour, 2 hours. I'd go down to South Carolina to an area I'd never been to. And that was always the lure I could depend on to produce fish in an area I'd never been to. So I wasn't going to change it up here in Texas.
So you were using, you said jig heads. Did you do any weedless stuff? Any Texas rigging? What were you doing?
So I did start out with jig heads, and that was probably not the correct move. Again, that's what most of my tackle is. I did have weedless hooks in my box, and I really wasn't even thinking. I went out, used my normal setups, which is just my jig heads. I did lighten it up because I knew I was going to be fishing shallower. I had a 1/8 ounce jig head rigged on to begin with, just to kind of feel out those shallower zones first. And then I ended up switching it up as I got later into the day, just because I was catching up on a lot of grass. And I switched to the 3/16 ounce owner twist lock, which is fantastic. I know it's a new hook we just added to our store, but that's what I put on the Slam Shady 2.0. I was using a mix of the Z-Man Slam Shady, which is 3 inches, and the Z-Man or the Slam Shady 2.0, which is 3.5 inches. I prefer the owner twist lock on that 3.5 inch, just because it sits a little bit better with that profile. But I was using the jig head on the original Z-Man Slam Shady. Both of them worked just fine. And I believe if both of those lures had been switched in the positions, the fish would have taken them up on both of them. It was just more about what was easier for me as an angler to not have to clear grass off of, which is why I made that switch to that owner twist lock.
Cool. So I want to clarify something, because earlier you said you were looking for the deeper pockets, right? That you were, in the pre-trip planning, you're looking for kind of deeper areas where it hits the flat. Because some people could hear, oh, deep areas, he's talking about 15 feet, right? Because they might think, oh, Aransas Pass, and we're going to be fishing, really deep passes and inlets. Not the case though, right? Because keep in mind you're waiting, right? So you can't be that deep. So talk about the types of depth where you were, and what was the depth change that you were kind of fishing to find the fish, the strikes that you got.
Yeah, so the areas I was focusing on at first were as I was entering that flat. So you were transitioning from this really deep intercoastal channel. It's about 12 feet deep, and then it shallows up to this bar that's probably 2-3 feet deep. And then as you get a little bit further into the flat, there's some pockets where that intercoastal does kind of feed onto that flat, and there's a current channel that goes into there, and it actually displaces sediment, and it does create a little bit of a deeper cut. And you might not be able to understand what that is if you didn't look at that specific zone on Google Maps, which is why understanding how to read these maps is so critical. And I highly encourage you to go check out our tutorials on how to do this. But just a small depth change of 2 or 3 feet. When I started wading the flat, I was maybe up to my shins. And then when I started catching fish, I was probably about up to my belly button in
Mm.
water. And that's, I believe, me standing up, that's probably 3.5 feet maybe.
And then you
So
were obviously you weren't catching them at your belly button. How far out were you casting when you were catching fish? What was the depth in general?
So the fish that I was catching probably were slightly deeper than where I was standing. So maybe 5 to 6 foot.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, they were just kind of hanging right in those cuts. Again, the potholes that are on these flats are even slightly deeper than that. So they're just looking for whatever that warm pocket's going to be in an area that's surrounded by cold, just because they're going to find the spot that's most comfortable for them to sit in and get that meal.
Yep, that's awesome. And guys, if you're still wondering, hey, was that structure? Absolutely. I mean, potholes are structure, even seagrass is structure, ledges are structure. Any kind of just change, any kind of irregularity down there can act as a form of structure for these fish. One, to protect themselves, and then two, to be there to get any and all bait that's coming across them. I mean, they're in a day, they're kind of lazy. They're kind of like us. We all want to eat every day, and we don't really want to work for it, right? It's the reason fast food is so popular. I mean, we all want kind of the meal, a good meal, as quick as humanly possible, and we don't want to have to go out there and hunt for it every single day and skin deer and do that. It's fun to do every once in a while, but I mean, think about how tough that would be. And same with the fish, right? They don't want to have to exert every bit of energy they have to get one meal. They're looking for the easiest thing possible. And I think if you can put yourself in their shoes or their fins, if you will, it starts becoming a whole lot easier when you combine that with the satellite maps and with the smart fishing tides and all the things that we're constantly teaching in the Insider Club. It just gives you every advantage possible over the fish, because our whole goal is that you maximize your time, that you go out there and not necessarily catch an inshore slam every single trip. That would be cool, but there are tough days, right? And there's new times where you have to go to new spots, even though you caught how many species? Two?
2 species,
Okay.
yeah, 3 fish in total.
Okay, so three fish total, and so a fish an hour. You got redfish and trout on a brand new spot, brand new state. First time ever fishing there, using the same technology and the same trends and the same info that you've always had, and didn't even have to buy new tackle.
Yeah, and I memean the focus wasn't even necessarily to go out there and just hammer one spot. This was an exploration trip. I probably could have sat and continued to catch fish, but I'm feeling out this new area. I've got a lot that I want to teach insiders, and you guys aren't going to learn from me just showing you one honey hole. So I'm trying to bounce around. I'm trying to kind of demonstrate different strategies, and I'm so looking forward to creating so much more content for this area.
That's awesome, man. So, yeah, talk about the plan. You're in Corpus Christi area. That's it's kind of perfect, really, because you can go up north and south. You're kind of dead in the middle of Texas. I think I'm not a right.
About kind of like the middle, but right now the plan is to focus on trout for probably the next 2 months. This is
Yeah.
that time of year where a lot of big trout are caught, just because they've fattened up for the winter, and then they're about to spawn here in the next couple months. And I'm going to be heading down to Baffin, doing a lot of fishing down there,
Cool.
and then I'm going to start transitioning a little bit more towards the redfish side of things, and flounder will be moving in as well in the summertime. So I'm looking forward to traveling not just around Corpus Christi. I want to go up to Galveston, do some fishing up there. I'm looking forward to going down to South Padre. I want to do a lot of fishing and just
Uh,
cover all the different aspects of Texas fishing, because because you can go north and you can have a completely different fishery than what I'm experiencing here in Corpus. And, same with going south. There's areas that look a lot like North Carolina. And I would say that the area that I was fishing here in Corpus looked a lot like some of the zones I fished with Luke when I come down for our meetings in Tampa. So, I mean, it's such a diverse fishery and I'm looking forward to learning it. But I'm so lucky because a lot of these strategies translate over. Most of what I learned and the reason I was able to have success out in knowing where to target these areas, knowing that potholes are an effective type of structure to target, is all from everything that I learned in those introductory courses from Salt Strong. And it just all carries over regardless of where you live.
Yep, absolutely. Well, man, we're blessed to have you, and you insiders. I know we have a lot of you Texans. Blessed to have Wyatt. Make sure when you're in the private community to follow him. He's putting up new reports and even just new state specific and region specific tips for your area, and we'll be traveling quite a bit. I know even coming back over here to Florida. And you'll see a whole lot. This was a big plan of ours late last year, and the whole COVID thing really kind of screwed it up. And it looks like it's not getting that much better right now. I think, if anything, could be even somewhat worse. But it will get better over time, and we'll all be able to go out there and travel and fish with our insiders a whole lot more. Got the new Salt Strong boat. We got some new coaches we're going to be adding on this year as well, to really just have every single area, every region from South Texas all the way up to Virginia. I mean, anywhere you can catch any of our favorite inshore species that we hammer. And I know we have members in all 50 states now, but the really that South Texas to Virginia is like our bread and butter, where we can just keep cranking out all kinds of amazing tips and shortcuts. And of course, the tackle side of things too has been big. We have now some proprietary products like the Power Prawn. Got a proprietary rod coming out with very soon. That's all I can say for right now. We've been working on that for quite some time. Got some proprietary chum coming out. That's all I can say on that. We'll get some really, really cool stuff that will be for our insider members. And of course, you save up to 20% on everything in the entire store at fishstrong.com. So just one more reason to be an insider member. It's our family, it's community. We even today, I had 2 different insider members reach out to me on our little private chat. It's basically, we've taken some of the best of let's just say Facebook and the best of just old school forums and merged them together and have our own private community. So it's not on Facebook. It's completely private. And so, we have control of the whole thing, meaning you're not going to see ads. You're not going to be told what you can and can't say, except no cursing. That's the one rule we have. We don't want any negativity. We don't feel like cursing adds any real value to any conversation online. And so we just want it clean and family fun. And once again, when you're where I was going with this, so 2 different people in the chat asked me to pray over some things going on in their lives, and I just sat back and thought about it after I said some silent prayers for them. Just how cool that is, that we've created something that's a whole lot bigger than just about fishing, right? I mean, it really has become a family, and just the amount of trust and love that is in that group. It's really, really special. So it's become a family to Luke and I know to you, Wyatt, and we're just so grateful for all you members. I know a lot of the members listen to this podcast as well. And speaking of that, we're going to have our own private podcast version just for insider members. That's another thing coming here in February. So that will be completely insider only, kind of like a live Q&A, and only insider members can get on that podcast. And obviously we'll record it and turn it into a private podcast that can only be accessed via the community for our members. So a lot of cool stuff coming up. We got a lot of new tackle coming up, and just a ton of new shortcuts and how-to lessons. So Wyatt, awesome, dude. I'm so pumped that you're there. I saw your fish pics on Instagram, and I was like, because I was like kind of nervous for you. He's like, oh man, it's his first day in Texas. I hope he does well. And I know it wasn't a lot of pressure because you were just exploring, but it's cool when stuff works, right? And we all know that, right? It's cool when you study something and you go try it and it works. It's awesome. So I was so pumped to see that, and so pumped to hear that you didn't have to change up your entire strategy. It's not as fish are not as smart as we give them credit for. That I mean, they're easy to catch, but they're not as tough as we sometimes give them credit for. When you know what to look for and you can put yourself in their fins and think like the fish. So
Absolutely. And I mean, you and Luke and Tony and all the coaches that came before me, it dedicated themselves to just putting out simple, clear, concise information. And that just made it really easy for me to transition to this new area, apply those concepts without any kind of extra, biased information or bogus lures. Just got to focus on what actually works. And I was just so blessed to be able to come down here and put it through the process and catch some fish. So I'm excited to do it some more, excited to put some content out for our Texas insiders and to everybody listening that might not be a member, that might have been confused on any of the spots that I was talking about or any of the types of structure. I highly encourage you to just join. It's completely risk-free. If you use the membership for a year and you feel like it somehow didn't help you catch fish, which is like virtually impossible, we will give you your money back. And I can promise you that being able to see live examples, understanding what I say, what I mean when I say a depth change or a pothole or a just type of structure, being able to see it and then see how it's fished with live action GoPro on my head, it can absolutely revolutionize your fishing game. I went from somebody that didn't know anything about fishing, seeing coaches like Luke and Tony do this, and now I'm able to do it myself. So highly encourage you guys to join us. I really want to help you become a better fisherman. And Joe, thank you for helping me become a better fisherman.
Dude, you're the man. Like I said, it's all an assist from our side. Every time we get thank yous from members, and I mean Wyatt's with us obviously full time, but it's always an assist, right? We can teach just like any teacher. The student has to go out there and put it to use and actually study it. And once again, we try to simplify it. For we have some members who just love. They'll sit there and I mean, we put out a lot of content, and they'll I mean, sometimes 5, 6 hours, 10 hours a week they're consuming. And we have a lot of people that just want the 10 minutes. So like, man, I got 10 minutes. That's all I got. I'll even listen to it while I'm on the way to the ramp. And we have something for you. It's a 10-minute smart fishing game plan that we do every week. So we got something for everyone. And we have members who have been in your shoes. The majority of them are weekend warriors. We do have some beginners, and we even have full-time guides. About 10 to 12% of our members are actually full-time guides and captains. So hope to see you there. For you guys who are current members, thank you so much. You are family to us. Make sure to get in the community. We've added a lot of new things at community.saltstrong.com. That's the private community for insiders only. A lot of new cool stuff on there. And you're going to see a lot of new features and even some just new designs. And now it's a progressive app. So it works really, really well with mobile, and you can add it to your phone just like a normal app, and you're always logged in. So a lot of really cool changes on that end. So guys, thank you. Wyatt, thank you. And I'm pumped to see this whole journey in Texas. And I'm definitely gonna have to get out there and visit you. Like I said, I lived there for 4 years and really, really love my time in Texas. And I got to get back. So as soon as we get the go ahead on some a little bit more travel, and I think Luke and I will definitely be over there. So
Awesome. Well, I'll be here and the fish will be waiting for you.
oh baby, come on. All right, guys, thank you so much. We are out. We will see you on the next episode. Join us in the club at saltstrong.com. And if you have any questions, depending on where you're listening to this or watching us, go to saltstrong.com as well. And up at the top, you'll see a little tab that says fishing tips. You can go find this podcast episode. And at the very bottom of every episode, we have a place that you can ask questions. It comes right to Wyatt and I. So we'll get it right away. And usually we're good about getting back to this, any questions. Sometimes it takes a while because we get 100 questions on a podcast episode, but we always get back. And of course, we do look at it from insiders versus non-insiders. So if you're an insider, you get your questions answered a whole lot quicker. And of course, the best place is just going to community.saltstrong.com. We out. Peace. Thanks, buddy.